Welcome to Sparks of History. We are very honored to have with us today Dr. John Swails. Dr. Swails earned an A.B., M.A., and Ph.D. in history from the University of Georgia, as well as an M.A. in Near Eastern Studies from Brandeis University. Currently, Dr. Swails serves as the director of the Oral Roberts Center for Israel and Middle Eastern Studies. Dr. Swails has been nominated as a who's who among American teachers for multiple years. He was also named Ally of the Year by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC. And in 2007, Professor Swails was appointed to the U.S. Advisory Board of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. Dr. Swails, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. Glad to be
Just
here.
to get started, on a personal note, Dr. Swails, how did you become interested in Israel and the Middle East?
It's my father's fault. He insisted that I go with him on a trip to Israel in 1968. And at that point, my perspective and focus of my life changed. So I blame Dad.
Okay, that's a good blame. How old were you, and what did you do on this trip, and
I
how
was
did it change?
19.
What was your perception beforehand?
Well,
How did it change?
and it was while I was there, I walked onto the Hebrew University campus and I felt impressed that I should come back as a student. And I came back the next year as a student, and things have snowballed from there.
Okay, okay. Um, Thank you for sharing that. When we look at the current situation in American universities, and I'm not lumping Oral Roberts into this. There's a perception that there's a deep anti-Israel sentiment in the academia today. Why is that?
Well, that's a good question. And we see learned articles all the time about that. Why? Uh, there are a variety of answers, but I think the leftist and progressive group that took over the universities began in the 1960s. So my career in education, I was able to witness this from the inside, that they began to be influenced by ideas that come from outside the academy, so much so that right now, the level of anti-Israel and anti-Jewish sentiment on U.S. campuses truly alarming. And it seems to me to be almost anti-intellectual in its basis.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that anti-intellectual? Because they would claim that we are the true elite intellectuals, I would assume.
Yeah, they do claim that. But you have all sorts of contraindications. I have no rational explanation for why people would get out and march spouting pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas slogans when the people that they're supporting would reject them. For instance, gay individuals or communities in that area, they would be treated very harshly and have been treated very harshly by Hamas, but they're out supporting them in the street. And they're asked, why are you doing this? And they don't have a rational explanation for it.
And what's the mood at Oral Roberts? I'm assuming that's different. You have a different there's a different perspective
Yes,
there.
I'm very grateful for that. We do have a different perspective. However, there are still vestiges of that have crept in with students who've come in who are tinged with some of these ideas, mainly critical race theory. But I was confronted in an open dialogue last semester by an individual who's denouncing my statements on Israel as lies. So after the meeting, I asked him, because I was answering his questions to the best of my ability. I asked him, where are you getting all this information? He said, well, on the website. He called it up on his phone. It's the Al Jazeera website. And I said, well, you want to go to the back of that because on Al Jazeera website, I'm listed as a Islamophobe. So I said, you might as well go the whole bag while you're here. So
Yeah, got it.
so
Yeah,
their ignorance is fueled by a lying agenda from the other side.
got it. Okay. When you look at that, do you see that that's a failure not on the university level because on the college level because they're already coming in with that perspective? Is that a educational failing in the system itself at a younger age?
Yes, yes, it's amplified when it reaches universities, but it's already in the system.
And what's the state of Christian Zionism today in general terms? And why and how has it become a target of certain apocalyptic Islamic scholars?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've written a couple articles on that. And Jean-Pierre Filiu, a French author, keeps up with this much more closely. The fact that this change occurred somewhere around 2008, as he demonstrates in his research, shows that they begin to recognize the amount of support. I gave a paper in 2006 at the International Studies Association, which I dealt with the implications of Christian Zionism across the world because of an experience I had in Kazakhstan in the year before, where I went to a church in Karaganda that was very strongly pro-Israel to the point of having Stars of David embossed into their ceiling and inlaid into the marble floors. So I was able to meet the pastor and the leaders of this very large church, and they just explained to me that they not only were pro-Israel, but they'd sent several members of their staff to Israel. This is from a country that is nominally Muslim. So that alerted me to the fact that there's a widespread pro-Israel sentiment among a certain class of evangelical believers. Not all, but a certain group of evangelical believers. I've been following that up. I believe that support is greater than we realize. I think it's reflected in the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress, we have a virtual 2/3, depending on which vote you look at, majority both in the House and the Senate who are pro-Israel and vote consistently pro-Israel. So that's an example of Christian Zionism, if you wish, and that's a true representation of the population of the United States as shown by polls. So yeah, this is an ongoing phenomenon, very important one. I spoke to the Christian caucus in the Knesset in 2004, and this is a long time ago now. My goodness, 20 years ago. But I pointed out that, look, the Jewish population worldwide is, at that time I said 14, but it may be 15 or 16 million now, which is, in comparison with the total population of the world, is a minuscule proportion. But when you add in the millions, even hundreds of millions of Christians who support Israel for a variety of reasons, but mainly biblical, who support Israel, then you have a level of support and sort of a constituency of support that is truly amazing. I urge them to cultivate that. That's the guys you need to be looking at, because even if you got all the Jews together, that's still only a few million. But if you get tens of millions or hundreds of millions of Christians chiming in, that makes a truly resounding noise.
And do you see, Professor Swales, that support is being passed on to the younger generation?
Well, that's a good question. And that's a question I ask myself regularly. I do believe it in a certain sense, but at the same time, I see indications that that is not being passed on in ways we would like to see. We see different ministries who are coming into the hands of successors who don't share the founders' enthusiasm for Israel. Those are questions definitely ongoing.
And when you look at the recent Abrahamic Accords, do you believe, as a analyst of the Middle Eastern world today, that signifies not just a political change, but also a change in the Jewish-Islamic relations?
Well, number one, the Abraham Accords are a complete surprise to me or to anyone that I know who studies history and is aware of this. That came out of the woodwork as something that we hoped for and perhaps looked for in some future age, but maybe didn't really expect to see at present. The Abraham Accords are a true miracle. Now, I give credit to Donald Trump. I don't know. I just had a friend from Israel in who's on the leftist side, and he dislikes Trump very soundly. And the whole issue is that should have been the basis for a Nobel Peace Prize. And the fact that it was not even considered, he was nominated 3 times, but it wasn't considered. That's truly unlooked for. And it represents a significant groundswell of change in the Muslim world, not just the Arab world.
And why is there this change? And how do you see this progressing and developing? What has happened in the Arab world?
Well, number one, their deep divisions. The UAE, which led the talks, and others followed in later on, and I believe even Saudi Arabia is very strongly considering this. They recognized the deep division in the Muslim ranks because they recognize the attempt by Iran to exercise hegemony over the Middle East and to dominate the Middle East in a variety of ways, especially with the introduction of nuclear weapons. So they recognize the threat. And at that point, the past animosity toward Israel becomes pale by comparison. That's something that we don't realize. So they recognize Iranian threat and Iranian potential, and they say, well, look, I grew up just as you did, seeing the embargo on Israel, the fact that you couldn't travel with an Israeli passport into these countries, or with even an Israel stamp in a U.S. passport, and where one country would boycott Israel and another country would defy the boycott and go to Israel. I saw all of this, and so knowing all of this and realizing the tensions that existed before, to see this openness, and now even air flights between the countries, UAE and Israel, for example, that's truly amazing.
And how do you see the events since October 7th, the brutal massacre of October 7th, and of course the current war? How do you see that changing the political and religious dynamic in the Middle East?
Well, number one, and this is this attack, this sudden surprise attack, and the viciousness, the cruelty, all of the things that are represented in this attack have been like a immense wake-up call across the area. I think there should be a wake-up call for us in the United States because of the response of so many in the public domain. So, number one, the scar in Israel, remember after the Yom Kippur War in 73, the great losses that were suffered left a deep scar on the psyche of Israel and was evident in a variety of ways, talking with my friends and their families. But this scar goes much deeper, almost to the bone, because this represents a true turning about of the way things have been looked at in Israel and in the Middle East. They forcing people to make a decision. Are we going to support a group who are terrorists, who have declared their animosity for Israel and declared their intention not only to wipe Israel out, but to kill Jews? At that point, you don't have much, there's no room for negotiation there. How do you negotiate with people who've sworn to kill you? And to see, I'm dismayed, of course, by the things that the government is, our U.S. government is saying about it, because we're saying that we want Israel to make peace with them in some way or another. And you can't, it can't be done. It'll merely postpone another attempt for them to come and to try what they did on October the 7th. So it just puts things into a sharp, clear focus that maybe wasn't there before.
Dr. Swails, if you had 5 minutes today with President Biden, I think you've said it basically, but you have 5 minutes with President Biden, and he wants to get your expert advice on the Middle East as a historian, as an analyst. What would you say to Joe Biden? And the same question, if you had a couple of minutes one-on-one with Prime Minister Netanyahu, what would you tell him?
Well, I'll start with Netanyahu.
Okay.
I'd say, don't trust us. Don't trust the U.S. because we mean well, or at least generally we mean well. But when the decisions concerning the security of Israel are concerned, those have to be paramount in your decision making. And we're going to, in many cases, mislead you or abandon you. So that's what I would say to the prime minister. To the president, I would say, whatever, and this I would say to him, but really, I view him, because of a variety of reasons, as a sort of a sock puppet who's parroting things that he's told and things that appear on his teleprompter, and not necessarily have a connection to principles he holds inside. I would say to him, don't stand against Israel. Israel represents everything that the United States always has professed to stand for. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, rule of law, variety of things. And this does it in an area of the world where these things are not valued or valued very lightly. So I would say stick with Israel. And whatever aims you're pursuing with Iran, you have to recognize that those are based on a fallacious premise. Iran is not and never will be our friend. They proclaim in the squares, chanting, hundreds of thousands of people, death to America. And to Iran, we're the great Satan. Israel is the little Satan, but we're the great Satan. So whatever you're doing, whatever your motives for doing it are, I would urge you to rethink it, abandon those principles. For some reason, I mean, right now, even while he professes, or in the first part of this, in the early October and November, he professed support for Israel, he's still funding Iran, or attempting to. The government has blocked the latest $6 billion, but he has relaxed the oil sanctions that were imposed under Trump's administration, and billions of dollars have poured in that would have been stopped by sanctions earlier. So even while he's saying this, he says with his mouth that Iran, we recognize Iran as the head of the snake, but at the same time, we're funding them underneath the table, as it were. That I don't understand. I have tremendous questions about that.
And if, Dr. Swales, you could, on this forum at least, send a message to us living here in Israel, what would that message be?
I would start with the biblical admonition, Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and be courageous. Never more than now, that word is applicable to the people of Israel. It's time to be strong and courageous. Number one, Hamas has to be dealt with. A burden has been laid upon the nation of Israel to deal with this murderous group that has no redeeming characteristics. They have a show of humanitarian support, but it's merely a show. Everyone knows that. So Hamas has to be dealt with. It has to be reduced in its capacity to influence or inflict harm. And then the enemy of the north has got to be dealt with. You can try to coexist with Hezbollah for a period of time, but you and I both know that the massive armaments that they've stored there are intended to be used, and they're going to be used at some time or another. And I would suggest now's the time. So I understand the burden that imposes upon Israel, but there you go. It's like the young Israeli woman who's part of a group who saved so many on October 7th. She said, "Hey, I just did my job." And I burst into tears when I heard her say that. And I thought, that's a true hero. She was just doing her job. And this is a job that Israel has been given. And I would say, face it as such. That's me talking.
Oh, absolutely. And next trip planned to Israel? Anything planned? Anything on the
Sometime this
horizon?
summer.
I'm sorry?
I've been 40 times to Israel,
Wow.
lived there twice. My youngest son was born in Jerusalem.
Wow.
He's in the U.S. Army now. Not both of my sons are in the U.S. Army.
Where are they serving? Where are your sons serving?
Well, my oldest son, who's a linguist, he's serving in Africa right now, and my youngest son is at Fort Bragg.
What is the
in
U.S. Army
school.
doing in Africa? What?
Well, I don't know how much I'm supposed to know, but he's with the
Okay.
team traveling in Africa. So
Got it. Okay. Very good. Any final thoughts again on the situation today, on the Middle East, on the history? Final thoughts to conclude.
well, I want to sort of reiterate the point I was making to the people of Israel, to you. You've got a terrible task on your shoulders. You didn't go out and look for it, but it's not something that you can shirk off to someone else. You can't say, here, you take care of that, or you take care of it. It has to be done. Hamas has to be dealt with. They have to be dealt with firmly, without equivocation, unequivocally. They have to be dealt with. And then Hezbollah has to be faced. And how this plays out into the whole worldview, that's something that you have to tiptoe through, like the proverbial tiptoeing through a minefield. And I believe that you're going to find support in unlikely places, but you definitely, all the polls show to date that there's tremendous groundswell of support among Christians in the United States. So, that poses some issues, but at the same time, it provides a little bedrock of confidence for Israelis to look at and say, hey, we got friends there. They might not be the kind of friends that we would choose up front, but right now they're our friends. So I kid my Israeli friends and say, so hold your nose and put your arm around us. So.
Okay. Again, Professor Dr. Swails, this has been fascinating, and as you said in Hebrew, chazak ve'amatz. So I would say to you that you should continue to go mechayil to chayil. You should continue to go from strength to strength, and with your teachings and your advocacy, and to know that it's deeply appreciated. And so, thank you again for today, and thank you for all your efforts.
Shalom there in Bet Shemesh.
Thank you.